Yeah.
Tak? Tak?
So I start.
The
Yeah.
first question is, when and how were you invited to Poland for the first time?
Yeah. Well, actually, Poland was my first real experience with the countries on the left side of the iron blanket, or iron carpet, as we called it at the time, going through Europe. Hannah and I had been driving down through Czechia during the Czechoslovakia at that time, during the Prague Spring with Dubček and so on. We remembered the feelings that nothing seemed to have changed the last 30 years or something like that. But at the same time, we also remembered a certain warmth. People walked around, on the small cobblestone roads, holding each other's hands and stuff like that. It was an absolute plus moment for Czechia. Then, of course, Dubček went out, Kagyu went in, and other things happened, and that was it, right? But that was our first feeling, of some of the Slav warmth, right? Then in 76, was it? Yeah, 76, Kammerpa left Europe on his second tour. We'd been driving him around to all the different places and so on. Hannah and I in our old Volkswagen bus, and it was a wonderful time. Great time with him, and also Jamgon Rinpoche was there at the time, but of course Kammerpa was outshining everything, and everything was inspiration. And there, when we were about to leave, it was a big hotel in Geneva, I remember. Then and they had just found a place and they just found the place in southern France, which became the Dordogne that we are working with today. Well, at that time, then I told Kammerpa that I had received an invitation from Poland, right? Which it wouldn't be very difficult to visit because we were Danes and we are inside the same Baltic area. So, and he was very interested. He said, Poland? I said, yes, I don't know much about it, only literature, that they suffered terribly in the Second World War, that a lot of really rough things were there, and that they had no freedom now, right? And a communist system. And having fled the Chinese, of course, he nodded his head, yes, and he said, yes. And it was a very interesting time, It was a very magic moment, actually. We were sitting there in the hotel, and a friend called Barry Bryant from New York, who had totally destroyed his knee jumping off a bridge somewhere, in the Kashmir. He was actually sitting there with his stiff leg, and during the hour we were with Kammerpa, he was bending this leg more and more and more, right? And in the end, it was completely normal, and next time I saw him in New York, he was running around normally. But anyway, just to say how magic the moment was. And Kammerpa said, Poland, and I said, yes, we have this division in Europe, we could drive up to this place, and then we needed a lot of papers to move on, and you couldn't be sure about getting gasoline and stuff like that. And he said, yes, and so on. And then he said, show me a map. And I showed the map. I also showed Krakow from where the invitation was. And he said, well, that's interesting. What's your Buddhist name? And I said, Karma Lodi Jamtso, Ocean of Wisdom. And not the highest wisdom, more practical wisdom. But anyway, he said that. And he said, the first center in the east, on the other side, in the Warsaw Pact, will actually be Karma Lodi Jamtso Ling, right? And you start that. And then he got more interested, and he said, do you have a bigger map? And then we found a map which covered all the way up to Japan, across Eurasia. And he started saying, yeah, and you make centers afterwards the whole way, he said, And he said, oh, thank you very much, So we were quite impressed, Hannah and myself. And then, we went up there. We came up via Vienna, where we could get a visa and so on, up through Czechia, where I nearly beat up a couple of policemen because they treated their people so badly, like cattle, so respectlessly. I was up there and Hannah kept putting me back at the seat, and everything like that, because I was really getting angry, right? I really thought, what are they doing to their people, right? What is that, right? And the Czechs, they were all like, you could see that they were used to it, right? And then we we got all the stamps out of Czechia into Poland. And on the way into Poland, then there was, that was quite a thing. The soldier there at the watch at the border, he stood there, his hat was all the way on the back of his head. He looked like a young poet, he was talking about this and that, and you could do this and that, and everything. And I think he stamped the wrong place first, then he stamped the right place, he didn't care, right? And we got in from there, and we all said, this is funny, these people are different, right? They are not robots like in East Germany, right? They are, they're just a lot of poets, a lot of dreamers, a lot of nice people, basically, right? So we came in there, and I remember we had to, of course, hide away, a bit. And we came to Radzikovsky Ego 152, if I'm completely right? At the Atomic Institute, which was there. And we came to the Sapnik family, Vladislav, who had invited us, and so on. And here there are two different stories about it, I am sure I got a letter from him that said that while he was shaving one morning, there was a red lady dancing in the mirror in front of him, and he knew somehow intuitively that now it was time for Buddhism to come to Poland. He just knew that, and then he asked around, that, who could do that. And then somebody knew, also Boris, a Jewish gentleman, from Czechia. He knew about that. I forget the other name, Boris something, who was also mixed up doing many things, right, and so on. And he had told him, well, there are these young Danes, Hannah and Ole, and they go everywhere. They don't need special treatment, they're modern people, and they're starting a lot of groups around Europe right now.
You have to look at this
Yeah, okay, yes. No. Sorry, I was looking at my lawyer. Yeah, not at my inspiration. Also at my well, yes. Can we still use it, or shall we start again?
Maybe last two sentences.
Yeah. Yeah. So so actually, what happened was that we got deeply that he said, you have now This Boris David was his name, right? This Boris David, he had talked to, who went to different art exhibitions and so on, who was still free and so on. And he had asked to talk to him, and he had said, well, actually, there's this young Danish couple, and they, Nydahl and Ole and Hannah, and they travel everywhere, and they're easy. They speak European languages. They spent some years in the Himalayas. They know quite a few things about Buddhism, and they're starting some first groups and so on. So if you want something to happen in Poland, you better invite them. And I asked him about this thing with the red lady in the mirror afterwards, and he couldn't remember, but he wrote it. I'm sure he wrote it, right? So I don't know what kind of inspiration it was, but the result was the lineage had already shown itself that this was going to be Kagyu country, right? Because it's our main yidam, right? And so on. So this was actually very important. So we came there, we stayed there. Some people came. It was a very nice family, there in the caretaker's place for the Atomic Institute there, and a few people came, and we started working with them and so on. And it left us, with a lot of very interesting impressions. People were very kind, they were exceedingly well educated. Well, we knew that in communist countries everybody was educated because nobody could get a job, so they kept putting people back into university again, right? So we knew about that, but still we were impressed by the level of knowledge that the people had, the level of culture. They could all play something, do something, and so on. It was inspiring. It was very inspiring to be there. And we went out, after that, and the first group had already appeared. Then I think we were gone for about a year or something like that. And then it was time to come again, and this time we came in our car. We were able to take our old Passat car over the border and come down and so on. No, actually, again from the south, again from Vienna and up, where now there were better roads and things like that. And remember at that time, Vladislav had been busy. A lot of our friends today, were already there. it's like Russia, you know, the first people we started with in Russia are also still there, you know. Wojtek was coming, you know, many people were coming. We had a connection up to Radom. We had a connection up to several other places. I don't think yet to Gdansk, but to several places in southern and central Poland we already had contacts. And there at that time, you know, we could see that things would now grow because people were using what they got, they took it home, they talked to their friends about it. And because everything was so cliquish anyway in the way that it had worked, right, then this was how it was done, right? This was how Buddhism was done here, from groups of friends, you know, who just like what we call, you know, scrapnel or something like that, going out like that. It was really nice. That time also we got all the stories because there were so many non-communists in Radom. There was nothing on the shelves except for sour gurken, what are they called, sour cucumbers and stuff like that. We got all the stories and began to feel at home with the whole thing and so on. And after that, then we came, you know, more or less every year. 1 year we couldn't come, you know, that was actually a pity, but except for that, we did come nearly every year. And we also, you know, we were not rich, we were starting everything, everybody was starting, but we could also leave a bit, you know, which you could change in the black market and you know, do things with and so on. And once I remember we took, for just very, very few dollars or marks or what it was at that time, we were going to take a whole group of, I think, 150 people were traveling with us everywhere, you know, on these cheap train tickets that we could get, right, because of the system. So, you know, so it began really to grow. I remember the faces from that time. They're still around, most of them, you know, and I also remember the feelings, you know, how going through all the different things together, also the political things. I was in, for instance, some years later with Solidary Notch started coming in, you know, I took a few messages in and out, nothing big or dramatic, right, but to Copenhagen, to Polish people there and stuff like that and so on. So we did what we could, right? Of course, we weren't so useful because we didn't know the language, but, you know, we could always bring some papers and some things across. And there, I remember a very fundamental time, you know, in this process of growth was actually when they stormed, that we were there when they cracked Solidary Notch. I remember I'd been up with our friends in Gdansk who came quite early after we started, actually. It was a Zen group. What was her name? Dorota Krzyżanowska and her mother. And we were there, you know, at staying there, you know, and really good friends. And I remember we were looking right over at Valesa, at the workers' main quarter. And we saw these old people standing there, you know, in big black coats, you know, some with a pickaxe, some with a spade, some with whatever they could get. They were going to protect their freedom, right? They wanted to do that, right? And then after that, there was, you know, of course, the storm on the Lenin Schiffboft, where our hero here, you know, he actually, while everybody else was running out, while they were being beaten by the police, he crawled over to get in and fight them and so on. And also got beaten a bit, but honorably, right, like that. So at that time, you know, we were down in Krakow. And I remember the Poles were really disturbed. You know, there was probably only one institution in the country they could have any kind of contact or any kind of confidence in, and that was the army, right? And that was, and they were really shocked because, well, everybody else, nomenclatura, everybody else were transparent and, you know, and the system was already dead on its feet, right? But the army, you know, they still had some trust because they had fought so well against the Germans and the Russians and both and whatever in the war, right? And been a good force, you know, for freedom in Warsaw at the siege there where the Russians were waiting on the other side for the Germans to kill everybody and then moved over, right? I mean, at this time, you know, the army got a very good name, and suddenly now it was their own army that had come on them, right? I remember people were really nervous, and there was war state. I remember they were all just the war state. Where's the war, right? You know, but I mean, emergency, right? But there at that time, I thought, we got to get our people together. And at that time, where you could get shot if you were more than 3 people, I got everybody into a vault underneath the Krakow main square. Actually, the place where they had stopped the Tatars, where they blow a couple of times, and then no more sound, because the man who woke up everybody had already looked like a porcupine with arrows sticking out of him everywhere, right? But anyway, it saved Poland, right, from Islam, right? He was a great hero, and it's still being celebrated there. And then there's this funny, shop in the middle, which didn't have much to sell, this long building there, and then a lot of churches looking from all sides. Well, we came down under there, and we had this vault. And of course, things always magnify with time, right? Things get bigger, when you see the trees you used to climb in when you were a child. You said, but they're so small. I thought they were enormous, right? So it was the same thing here also, it really was. But I'm sure we had a couple of 100 people down there. I'm sure we were, we were really stacked. And I had the job of somehow finding something they could really work with, right? At first I said, I knew their situation, right? I knew what was going on. And after that, then I also said that I could understand that they worked against their government, but they could not hate them because they'd be acting out of ignorance and not a bad motivation like that, right? I remember I did that in the middle of the Bodhisattva promise. And the energy was so strong. It's just something I've had a few times with accidents, falling off a cliff, up in Scotland, and a few other things, right? But except for that, here I really had the feeling I lifted out of my body, and I was hanging there against the vault, and looking down on myself and everybody, and it was immensely powerful. And it wasn't my energy, it was the general Polish energy, this turning around, this enormous turning around of idealism, and understanding, that they had to work for what they did, their freedom, and at the same time, the other guys may have had some good motivation always, right? So there wasn't any really clear enemy, and this ability getting in to see things from 2 sides was so strong. I was just up against the wall, right? Then, they had just shot some workers in Gliwice and so on and so on. I remember the news came in just at that time, what was happening. Then I remember the next time we were there, that was actually after Solidarność was in power. I was gone, or under the ground, and Lech Wałęsa was being fed too much food and sex pills, and they sent ladies into him, and they photographed and gave it to the Pope, and all kinds of things were happening. That's what they said at that time, right? That was the general story at that time. I don't know if it was true, but it was an interesting story, right? Healthy little electrician, right? Keep him alone for too long, and good food, it could be dangerous, right? Well, anyway, I remember that, and I remember that here, Lena and Maggie, they had invited me to the Gdansk University, and they told me, when I came, they said, we are probably in big trouble. There's Zoom over there in the morning. And they told me, well, first I should maybe say Tomek was running 15 kilometers every morning in the woods to be able to throw stones and then get away before the Zomos were there in their old ladders or whatever they had, right? So he would be in and out. And once, actually, they took his passport and he was going to get it back the next day. And when he came back, the police station was burned down, right? So he had to get a new passport, like all kinds of things like that. But anyway, so they had invited me to come, and they said that the police was there this morning, and they said, if you say anything, you shouldn't say, or if this Danish Lama says something he shouldn't say, then your whole family will go to jail. And I remember there were all kinds of, not tanks, but high power water cannons and stuff like that all around the place, and I came in and everybody came there to see the first West European that they have seen for several months, right? Because it was all closed off. And it was full of people like that, and some very easily remarkable, policemen, right? Secret police, like so secret, that well, very easy to see how secret they were, right? So anyway, so these people then, I went in there, I hopped up on the table on where I should have sitting behind, and I started telling them, and the first thing I said, you are lucky that your system doesn't function, right? And two gentlemen got up, And then I said, because then you don't waste your time buying a lot of things you don't need anyway, and wasting your, and finding places to put it or throwing it away again. Instead of that, you have a chance to develop real human values. I mean, to fall in love, to have time for each other, to get all the times we lost in the West. Use this chance, right? And these two gentlemen, they were just looking at each other. Then they put the pencil at the paper and sat down and listened. They said he was right. I said, man, Poles are great. I'd expected, if East Germany, they would have carried me out. Russia, they would have sent people with guns, everything, right? But I mean, to Poland, they said, yeah, but he's right, and then like that. Then started the thing in Oliva up in Gdansk, where we went several times. We began to travel around the country, sometimes in old cars, sometimes with the trains and so on. And actually, I think we became family. I really think so. I mean, when we are here, even if I travel to towns that are maybe a few hours from each other, there'll be more than 1,000 people in the hall. There will. And there also, if I'm in Warsaw, we'll touch 2,000 often and so on. I mean, we just became solid friends, and people work with things. And they have this heroic spirit, they get in with absolutely nothing, buy an old wash tower, in the center of Warsaw because it's well placed. And then they just work and get money here and get money there and suddenly, we have Stupa House, right? Then next to that now we'll have Halle, right? And so on, we'll have all those different places and, and it's great. It's really people who have done everything from idealism. That's a Polish story. It's all idealism and human trust. People, the other places we sit on 5 times more money, but nobody does anything because they always think of all the things that could go wrong, right? And here people go in and they say, we need that, we'll do that. And they do it. All the way around the West Front, over the formerly German area. We have all the towns there down through Silesia, we're very strong, right? The Far East is not so strong, Lugansk or Lugansk? Yeah, Lugansk, yeah. And so on, it's not so strong, but the northern coast, again, Gdansk, Gdynia, Sopot, and further over up towards, well, Lithuania and so on, this way up, is also strong. So we're really, in some kind of collective wisdom, and I think without too much, maybe also quite a bit of planning, we got a really, really nice place. We have heavy Buddhism here. Also the fact that you take freedom seriously has been very important. Every time we've been attacked, and of course there are some people who think that everybody should have the same religion in a given country, right? Every time we were attacked by such people, we could actually take them to court and they'd have to excuse themselves and maybe even pay money and stuff like that. So all this, is an amazing thing, it's something to be really happy about. It's something that has, it makes Poland a very important place. Also from here, from Kuhari, which we bought for, I think, 600 marks or $400. It was the same at that time, which we bought here, there. Also from this, people begin to come in from different countries. We had the first contact from the Soviet Union at that time, which somebody from the Ural Mountains, he came in. I saw these interesting Eurasian faces for the first time. I said, wow, how interesting, right? I mean, so interesting, right? And then Hungary started here. But Hungary, of course, was something else. When we drove down from here, from Kuhari down to there, for the first time we saw a country where we were not the first. Hannah and I were not the first people to start Buddhism, right, in Europe. Because here already Alexander Tjörres had been, and he was he was apparently a very fine bodhisattva, and he had done a lot of work, and there were already several stupas standing and so on. Not really a practicing Buddhism, but a national Buddhism, right? I mean, we have that. We have our Hungarian identity and so on, and our own thing. And again, there it was good. It was a little rougher than here. Remember, we came to I think, no, it's direct. It was, I can't remember if it was Buddha or Pest, but one of the places, there was a big students' hall, right, and where people could stay, and that's where we stayed. We were invited to stay there. And I remember all night they poured me full of sweet wine, you know, and they also wanted to arm wrestle me. And when I was still cool after, you know, a few bottles, and I won most of the times, you know, then I was accepted. But that was another kind of test, right? It was not so much if you could touch the heart, it was more if you proved yourself, you know, as strong and solid, right, like that. So there, also from there it started, you know, and Poland, because of the borders, you know, and so on, really became a very important hub from where we went into all the countries around. Lubin, yeah.
Sense to repeat, or?
Yeah, Lubin, yeah.
Do you want to repeat that?
Lublin, not so strong was Lublin, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so the short about Kuhari. How did it happen that you bought Kuhari?
How it happened? Well, Kuhari was, of course, our big center, our meeting place for all of Poland, especially in the beginning, where it was the only place. Now we also have Bartholdi, we have Drobin, we have quite a few other places, you know. We have also Zakosana, we have Nagosica, we have all these places I can't really pronounce, but I know what they look like, and I help buy them and so on, so I like them, right? And they're beautiful places also. So all these different places we have, and they also developed very nicely. But the place from where it all happened was really here, right here in our main center. And here we actually from Kuhari we tried everything through. It was quite interesting. First, it was a communist model. A gentleman up from Stettin, a little fellow, you know, he came in, and we gave, I think, 10,000 marks, and he used that to feed his all his friends here for a year or nearly a year, you know, and nothing happened. Then we came again and we looked and said, what is that, right? Then he went home, right, and we began with some other people, a group of people who were working here, and that time also Manfred Meyer, you know, my motorcycle teacher also, right? It drives like a dream, you know. I just try to follow his back wheel, right, as well as I can. Really drives well. Well, so he started working here, you know, and a lot of things happened. A lady called Elisabeth Deutz came in because her son, you know, should actually have son got some money from an insurance company. And because he didn't like his mother, you know, then he just let her have it. And because she was a smart woman, you know, she also came here and gave the money and so on. And a lot of the rebuilding came from her money, from German money, like that. She died a while ago. We did a lot of wishes for her and so on. And she was a great idealist, but the Polish style was maybe a bit too much for her, you know, the long nights and the parties and the good feeling and so on. It was a bit much for her. But anyway, you know, she did a very good job and should always be remembered for her work here. And then came the time of Misiek, you know, who came in. No, first we had some friends, one of our Olympic rowers, right, and also his Sitya, his lovely wife, Sitya, something like that. Yeah, you know, he actually, they were here, they took care of it for a while, but maybe the style was a little bit too hard for some people because it was really like, not labor camp, but it was like, do something, right? And then after that, then Misiek came in, you know, and he proved his good taste in building while he was here, you know. He went to Ulan-Ude and built our center there. A beautiful, totally Polish style bourgeois home, you know, nice beautiful house on the built there and on a hill there in the middle of the place, you know. Did a very beautiful place there. So and also travels a lot, helped us to build down in Elista now, where we have another big project going on. We were there, and no, we've actually had Poles everywhere. When we were going to fix Copenhagen, you know, clean out between the bricks, you know, in our historical building there, 56. Then, you know, it's the same thing, you know, the Poles came up, they were there, they did the work. I mean, Poles helped us everywhere, Norway, wherever we were, you know, and they always kept their identity, they always worked hard, they always trusted each other's, you know, if there were any difficulties, it was mainly about ladies and stuff like that, and also that was not so much, right? And generally, you know, there was just really amazing what the Poles were doing everywhere. You were like a vitamin spread all over Europe. I mean, especially here, but also France, you know. And today, if you really look at it, then you are driving forces everywhere. I mean, first came the Scandinavians, but maybe a bit too individualistic and a bit too quick moving, and then came Central Europeans, especially Germans, you know, and then so the Slav wave came in, you know, Poles going everywhere, you know, going to South Island of, well, both North and South Island of New Zealand, going to Australia, being very useful in the centers there, and everywhere, you know, unchanging agents for the Dharma, unchanging, you know. I mean, you're always like some kind of program, you know, or something like that. Everywhere, you know, we've had growth, you know, Poles have been coming there. Poles and Czechs also now. Czechs more behind the computer, Poles a bit more lifting heavy things and so on. But that's what we've been doing, and it's been going very, very well. I deeply thank you. I mean, there's no way that we could have done what we are doing today, you know, and benefiting so many people without Poland, without you all. It's been very, very impressive working with you. I'm happy every time I come here. I enjoy it very much, right? Now unluckily I'll have to, well, not unluckily, but I'll cut down on alcohol a bit because it takes so much time, right? Getting it in, you know, getting it out, you know, and getting your head in place again, you know, it's difficult. So I'll take it more easy with that now. But except for that, then, you know, I think we'll keep our style and work on the best way we can and so on.
Can you say something about the first big Poa course here in Kuchary in 1988?
Yeah, that was amazing. You know, that was actually the one case we've had a mental case here, you know, in it, right? A gentleman, you know, suddenly tore off his clothes, you know, ran around the tent, you know, howling like a wolf, you know, and some people stopped him and talked to him, and he got an injection, you know, in the hospital, and he was fine again and so on. But that was actually the only time we've ever had that anywhere, you know. He was a long-distance runner. I think he could really run. But anyway, he also had good lungs. He could also sing and shout. But anyway, we got him, right? And except for that, the feeling was, you know, was just very strong. You know, it's like everything came together in a very solid way, you know. It's very powerful. It was the first of our courses here. The tent was down there on that side. I remember it. And well, yeah, signs were good, very quick, very good. You know, you could see people had their hearts in it. They also knew the importance and the meaning of the whole thing. It was a good course, a fine course.
Can you say something about the split we had at the beginning of the 90s?
Yeah.
And could you repeat because the question about when did you buy when you bought Kuchary? That you.
Yeah, it was actually interesting. Yeah, the buying of Kuchary was actually very interesting because there was a Lord Mayor from the town, from Fort or something like that. He had this, and he was an idealist, and some of our friends had talked to him, and he was willing to sell it because they couldn't run it, and the old house was crashed crashed down anyway. It was raining through the roof, you know. It's an old German villa from before the war, right? And all kinds of things had happened here. At that time it was called Königswinter, as far as I know, right? Now it's Kuhari. And this was being, and well, so he was willing to sell it. Some of our people talked to him. I can't remember who it was. Maybe it was our first president, the big fellow with the big beard. What was his name now? Marek, yes. Well, yes. So he was our president at that time. He left a little bit with some mixed feelings because he liked the flat better than his job, right? And so on, and that's also all right. Everybody at that time was crazy for flats, right? And so on. Anyway, he was a genius. He was very good at organizing things, and I remember he made this contact with the chief there, and we were out here, you know, and we looked at it together and stuff like that, and we found out that if we bought the trees, it would be a lot of money, but if we just got the land and the house, it would be very little. And I just put down, I still don't remember if it was, I think it was $400, 600 marks at that time. I put that down for the whole original area, which was, I think, 7 hectares or something like that. So that was a very good buy. I remember they didn't like it down in Krakow. There were a lot of people who didn't like a centralized place in Poland, right? For some reason they centralized. They thought, you know, maybe too many spies, too much this and that, and so on. But we saw we needed that because there was a place where there had to be a place where Poles came together and worked together and so on. It was just really necessary. So I just bought it anyway, in spite of quite a few people who had other ideas, right? And it was a good idea. Same time, other friend, our present president, you know, he was traveling around, you know, looking at other things in the south, you know, in places you couldn't use agriculturally, and then he bought some very nice places there also, and also for the same price. Between $100 and $300 at that time for a hectare of land. Of course, it's not a place you could put a tractor or something like that. It was more scenic with mountains and stuff like that. But that's the price we got the things at. So most of what I earned at that time went to Poland, right?
Okay, can you say something about the split in our lineage, which was and the story that you came by on your motorcycle here on this meeting?
We had there's one thing I should probably mention, you know, it sounds like Poland was always agreed, you know, and always everything, but actually, of course, there are always people who have their own ideas, you know, or who, well, maybe you can say can be bought, maybe not by money, but by fame and jobs and stuff like that, right? And there really was a period where our lineage split. You can say that right in the top. When we saw Kamapa the last time in Boulder, Colorado, he said, you know, help my 4 eagles when they fly from the nest, right? And we didn't know, if we didn't understand, he said that was sort of, you know, like, well, he wasn't very happy about the situation and mentioning it, but of course we didn't think that we'd have to help them against themselves, right? Against their wishes, some of them. And at that time there was actually a lot of things happening with the Chinese and in Tibet, because they had found they could not take away the trust in the lamas, so they did whatever they could to make the lamas look bad, right? So they at that time they picked a boy and said, this is a new Kamapa. Was it at that time? No, it was, was it? No. Was when? Yeah, I think it was. Yes. No, they picked. There were a few things by the new. No, it's so long ago. This with Adam and so on. It was so long ago. Was it? No, it was in the 90s, early 90s. Or when was it?
92.
92. Okay, but then it was the same story. Yes. Okay, sorry. You can cut this out, right? Well, so our different teachers, we always thought of them as being one, because Karmapa always talked about them as one and so on. But actually they were not such good friends as one might have thought, right? Shamarpa had been probably killed, by the Gelugpas 200 years earlier, and they had said mantras against his rebirth, right? But he had come anyway, and he'd always been born very close to Karmapa and so on, so he could protect him. And then when the trouble started in Tibet and the Dalai Lama wanted everybody to be organized, Karmapa said, I'm only going to help if you accept the Shamarpa again. And the Gelugpa said, okay, right, like that, because this was important. Then they came out, and then Karmapa built Rumtek Monastery in Sikkim, and there they were all living in their own places with their own servants and everything else that they had, right? And here, at that time, we just saw them as a totality, and we didn't know much Tibetan at the time. Even Hannah didn't, right? So we just thought everybody friendly, just different aspects. One was Maitreya, one was Upame, one was, I remember one was Chanadorji, diamond in hand. That was, what's his name? Jalsa Rinpoche, right? And then there was one, I can't remember what Jamgon Kongtrul was, but he was also some close helper of the Buddha 2,500 years ago, right? So, so we thought them as one, but then when Karmapa fell away, then their differences came up, right? Situpa, for instance, had always had problems with karma, because it said in the teachings that Buddhas are always born in noble families, and he was born from a blacksmith, an ironsmith, which is more or less the same as butcher in the Tibetan hierarchy, like that. So he didn't like that. So when there were karma teachings, he had a magazine in his book, and was reading that instead, and so on. So he didn't really like that. And Shamarpa, of course, because he was nobility, he was quite a bit proud, this can happen, right? And the others, they also had their own things, right? And it fell apart. And there, at that time, then, actually, Situpa was best placed, because he had already in the 80s, in the middle 80s, 85, he'd already made a deal with the Chinese that he would accept their Karmapa incarnation if he could teach in Eastern Tibet. And he went there and he did the smartest thing one can do if one has to do with Tibetans. One picks out an incarnation of somebody's horse or whatever, in a famous family somewhere, in a rich family. And then that's so much honor for the family, they have to do everything for you afterwards. It's the smartest thing you could do. So he was there and he traveled for several months, and I think he's found 300-400 different incarnations, right, which is not bad. Karmapa had an average of 1 or 2 a day, so he was very good, The master, the student became better than the teacher, right? So anyway, in this way he got all that behind himself, but then also they were going to bring this child, and the Chinese said directly, we picked him. We picked him. It's our candidate. We picked him. He is a Karmapa. And of course, we said, anything that's good for China is bad for Tibet, right? I mean, like that. So we said, and Shamarpa also, so we planned the thing there. I already 10 years before it happened, I gave a public lecture down on Camagüey in Spain, where I actually said, exactly what we would do to get Karmapa, if there was a real Karmapa, and they elected a political Karmapa, how to get him out. A couple, each with a child in their passport, but only one child on the way in, right? And 2 children out, right, like this, easy, It also worked. It nearly got into trouble because Shamarpa was so happy about what happened that he forgot the people who were stuck in Tibet, but they managed to get out anyway. But I mean, that was really the story. That was, well, so at that time, everybody put the power behind Situpa's candidate, because they thought, now so many years no Karmapa, now has to be one, right? And then they went up and they looked at the child, and he could be majestic, but he could also be quite difficult, right? And so on. So especially Anthony Karam from the Tibet house in in Mexico City. You know, it was very close and very high up with the Dalai Lama and so on. He went there and he really didn't like him, right? And so on. He said proud and no compassion and all kinds of stuff that you usually don't say about high teachers, right? So anyway, so that was what. So that was the one they tried to sell, but of course Hannah and me, we said, if it's good for China, if it's a Chinese candidate, we better check that a lot, right? And we did. We examined the whole thing, which was behind it, and so on, all the different intrigues, and then Jamgon Rinpoche, who didn't have a driver's license but had a new BMW, right? He killed himself and 2 of his monks, you know, and one was thrown out through the back window. He was trying to avoid some birds on the road, right? And, you know, 160 in a BMW feels like 60 in an engine car, right? So he was doing good speed, you know, and he died, and the others also died like that. So anyway, at that time, then Hannah and I, we had already had plans with him. We had planned for him. He had just been in East Tibet for a while, and then he went to Taiwan where the Chinese were fighting each other as always, you know, and he got all thin, and because he loved harmony, you know, and disharmony really disturbed him. And then, you know, after that, we had everything planned for him to go to Australia, be on the beach, get strong again, get healthy, everything planned. And then he wanted to go up and see Karmapa instead, right? They opened this pregnant letter, you remember, from Situpa opened this pregnant letter saying they had to do so and so many mantras, right? And everybody started and did it very quickly, 30 million or something like that. All our centers, everybody was to get it to happen, right? And at that time then, well, then this Adam, I forget his other name, you know, he had become good friends with well, first Siddha Rinpoche had been here. I remember that. That was some years before. And that was near Krakow. There was a big tent put up near Krakow, and I remember Hannah and I came in. And that was the time when they had some very beautiful woolen cloth in the state shops here. You know, didn't have much else, but they had this very fine woolen cloth, right? And when the Poles were going to give a donation, they asked if this was good cloth, and the Tibetans said yes. And then they gave, you know, they put all their money in this cloth, you know, which was very cheap, you know, and so on. And then afterwards, Akong Tulku from Samyeling, you know, he was a tough Scotsman, you know, I mean, well, Tibetan Scots, right? He came in and said, and money, you know. And I remember when that was in Olivia in the morning. We were there, was it in Olivia or was it in, it's possible it was also in Warsaw, but I think it wasn't it. No, that was for somebody else. I was in Olivia at that time. No, we were in Krakow, we were in Warsaw at that time. And there we heard the Poles just scream, wow, we have no money. Everything we got has been taken, right? And that was because Akong wanted it all, right? So then gradually we began to build up again and so on, but that was really heavy. Well, yeah. Oh yes. No, I should say I had one of my greatest joy experiences right there. That was very good. No, good you answer. Good stuff. One running good. One poa, you know, I remember really well was near Gdansk. I remember it was out. And we sitting very, very tight, you know, really tight, and we were working very hard, you know, and I remember that we used to just have we were twice as many people as possible, as usual, right? And we had just been planning for 300-400, right? And suddenly there were probably more than 700. And I mean, it was bad weather outside, you know, and everybody should be inside. So we did something which seemed to work. I asked everybody to stand up, everybody else to come in, and then they would stand like this. And then I said, now you sit down. And if what you sit on moves, it's living, and if and has to move away. And if it doesn't move, it doesn't matter, right? You know, it's already gone, right? Like that. And we managed to be in there. But I remember in this atmosphere, I had some of the, well, usually one shouldn't show too much joy, you know, one should just be a little bit cool, you know, because otherwise people think they should experience very dramatic things themselves and so on, right? So it's, But there, I must admit, I lost control. I just totally came through, and I was hanging all over the place. I was laughing my head off, I couldn't. And I was with a Danish girl called Maja at that time, and she came in and she looked at me and her face became so long. She said, "What is he doing?" Right? That was really funny. But it was too much. It was too much joy, And it was when we doubled the number of people, here. It was a really, really big, wonderful thing. It was a good power, very big, very strong, and it gave us a feeling also how much we could grow.
Do you like the way Buddhism is growing in Poland now?
Yeah, I'm totally happy. I'm very, very happy. I'm very glad about the way we managed the crisis. 92, that we, this Chinese candidate I talked about, right, for a Kammerpa was already on the scene. Everybody was trying to, they were praising the lamas who are not heroes, right, the monks who are not heroes. They're told to sign, they were all signing because, they thought, well, here signing is like a word, right? But in the East, you sign, it's just to win time to check the situation again from another side, right? So they have another thing. They don't have that feeling a man and his word and stuff like that, like we have. And also, anyway, monks are not supposed to be heroes. They're supposed to get through, right? And so on. So as we look at that, then we saw that then actually there was a big meeting which was being planned here without me really knowing from in Kuhari, and it was a time we were traveling with Lopinchichu Rinpoche, and it was exactly the evening I was supposed to give teaching in. I was supposed to give teaching in Basel, I think it was. But then we talked to Lopinchichu, and he took the job in Basel, and I came over here, right? I think I came on motorcycle even. I think we came, there was some other time. Anyway, I know I flew in and came here just at the right time and walked up. And there, you had real politics, honest politics, right? So I thought, first we get rid of somebody, first I said, his name was Adam. I said, he cannot be here. He broke his connections so often in so many ways, he's got to go out. And he got up, and, I have some authority, and he went out, right? And then there were some other things. Then, what was it? Great president, he did an amazing job. He threw out one or two others. A fellow who had actually never registered us. He'd been a translator for Jaruzelski, for everybody. Christoph was his name. For several others, the biggest people. We always thought we had a good connection in the government, but that when we found out there was absolutely no papers there, no anything. We had no name, we had no anything, he had completely, just completely. And I also remembered he was a bit funny because every time I visited, he always wanted me to do divinations for how he could earn money and how he could get rid of different people. And I said, come on, they have jobs, and stuff like that. You've got to fix that yourself, right? But it was always very egotistical and so on. And then we really found out that we were not checked anywhere. We were hardly known. We were half legal, and nothing was all right. And then Christoph had to leave, right? He got really afraid, Our president said, I put you in jail, and then zoop, he was out, He then it was over that. Then on the left side, sitting from where I was, were some old ladies who wanted Buddhism to be very holy and very Tibetan and completely ununderstandable, so they could just keep thinking the way they always did, and being Catholic at heart and everything like that, right? So that's the kind of Buddhism they wanted, right? So they got sick of us and they left, and then in the end we sat there and Buddyzmu Diamentowej Drogi in Poland had been saved, right? But it's because Lopinchichu Rinpoche was there, and he supported and everything. We could just make the jump over and take care of that. That's the only real challenge we've had here. We had a similar thing in Austria, where Alex and Tina, where they wanted to take over to make Austria something special, not cooperating with Germany and Poland and all the other places. They had this idea of cordoning it off, right? And I remember we were in Samara on the Volga, and I had just finished the Pova. Just the last one. And then we heard this, and then we looked around, and then there was an airplane route, Samara to Vienna, which probably only flew once, right? And we got on that one, and we landed there in the morning, and we went over, and we came in to see them, and we said, oh, hello, hello, right? And so on, and well, then we voted them out, right? But there was another time. These two times it was close to happening, and every time the transport organization had done something special. Also there from Basel to Vienna, to Warsaw, was also quite unusual. I think there weren't many, just it was a small airport, right? But so it made sense.
Do you have any wishes concerning our work in Poland, and how do you see the future of Buddhism
in Poland? I think there's a certain percentage, like everywhere, who wants to think independently, who wants to be able to ask questions, who are inspired by a teaching where way and goal are totally clear and where they can put in their own effort and their own power. They'll come to us. I think 10-15%, will be probably what we can expect. Will never be a big religion because most people like somebody else to have responsibility for their lives, right? But I'd say across Europe, 10-15% would probably be, and 20 years, would probably be a fitting number. Now, we don't want to have everybody, right? And a lot of my work, is to make sure that the people don't come, whom we don't want to have, right? That's also a reason for the example I give, and so on, that all the people, who, are sort of a bit boring, not so interesting maybe, right? That they find something else that fits them better, right? Like that.
Can you say something also about some people who are from Poland and support your work, like Tomek, Leonard, Wojtek, and Misiek, and Mira, and Karol?
Yeah, I mean, our whole system is here. We have everybody. You look at our board, and you have them. You have the names. You have the people. You have everybody. They are my best hands. Mira is taking care of my finances. Yeah, whatever's there, right? And others, and to help. It's everybody's together on this. Right, everybody's together. Karol bought our land, right? Wojtek is one of the most asked for teachers we have anywhere, right? Everybody says, Wojtek was here, you could always waves, and this happened and that happened, and his lovely Dakini also, and so on. And of course, my great lawyer, right, it's also done important work. And we travel everywhere. I have his iPad, which I forgot in San Francisco, but which I'll get back. In the meantime, I have another one I can use, so it's fine, right? And and all these different things, and all the women who've been kind to me here, who helped me make my life sweet and nice and so on. All these different things, being around me, taking care of me and stuff like that. It's all, it's wonderful here. I'm very, very glad. I look at all of you, and you're all close family. I don't have closer family anywhere, really. Yeah, really.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I have one thing, with one thing, no, that don't have to take, but that's probably my 4 years in the ring and a few other things is I have one place where my brain sort of clicks by the time I can't remember names. When I'm mentioning suddenly I click, I have everything clear, but I don't have the name, right? That's why maybe I should have a piece of paper so I can mention some people, our people at the same time, because I really, it's like I run up against the wall, I see everything, but a name doesn't manifest, right? So that's sometimes a difficulty if I'm talking to people and praising a lot of people. I have to talk our president, or this, or that, and so on. But I hope it's all right. It's 4 years of boxing, a few motorcycle accidents, 9 years on drugs. I think I'm still lucky. I have a brain, right?
Det skal jo være en anden type af simply know so many people, you know.
Yeah.
So an average person knows, I don't know, maybe 30, 50 people, and you know 100,000.
Yeah, I know many people. That's that could also be overcapacity, you know, capacity strained, right? Yeah. And also that experiences flowed into each other's, become generalized, you know, and so on. This is also there. Then it's fun when you are forced to bring it in again, you know, like I had a complete picture of our meeting down there. I saw exactly where the ladies were sitting. I could see them, I could see Adam go out, I could see the other fellow go out, you know. I began to look, you know, you together, you know, and stuff like that, and how we just...
It was really funny.
Yeah, that was quite a trip.
One of the guys started to protest, and he called you Ole, but you can't say it like this. Ole, you can't say it like this. And I told him, shut up. I'm Ole for my friends, and you should call me Lama Ole.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now it's good. We usually had, when we needed it, we had a horseshoe in our boxing glove, right? I mean, if things had to happen, that happened, right? You know, that happened quick and boom and stuff like that. We haven't lost anything, as far as I know. Maybe we've left a few people too much on the battlefield, but that was from the other side, not from our side, right? So, what to say? Yeah.
Thank you, Lama. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all.